Hello and welcome to our final episode of Behind the Scenes with the Lafayette Master Chorale and Children's Choir. I'm Michael Bennett, Artistic Director, and I think it's fair to say we saved the best for last. With me today is a man who in many respects helped define our organization as we know it today. He worked with so many singers over the years, directing the chorale and even the youth chorus, and taught many people, myself included. He was a tremendous leader to the organization and a mentor of mine, William John Gray. Bill, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome back to Lafayette in the year of 2020. Why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm living now in Albany, New York, which is where I was born. So I was born here and my whole extended family is still here. And when I was about 3 years old, my family moved to Aliceville, Alabama, right on the Mississippi border, the deep South. My dad worked for a company that had plants both here in Albany and in Aliceville. And so I was there until just before high school. Mm. And then we moved back here to the Albany area, and I went to high school here in Albany and got very involved with music when I came back. I had a fantastic high school choral teacher and music teacher who was an incredible influence on me. So I was very, very lucky. Went to a great school here. And I sang in the community chorus, a large 200 voice community chorus that did major works. I think the first piece I sang with them as a high school student was the Brahms Requiem. And I can remember vividly, we were at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in downtown Albany, which is an amazing building, just a fantastic bit of architecture and incredible acoustics. And it was at the dress rehearsal of that concert where I felt the stirrings, that maybe I might try to make a life out of music. I was standing there in the midst of all of those singers. I was in the 9th grade when we did this, and the orchestra was there and the choir and fantastic soloists, and I could barely sing. The whole experience was just so moving to me. Yeah. And of course that music, the Brahms Requiem, what an introduction.
Yes.
So after high school, I did my undergraduate at Juilliard in New York. I didn't know where to go or what to do, and I really didn't know what to study. I hadn't really seriously studied an instrument at that point, although I had been studying the organ with Lloyd Cast at the Episcopal Cathedral in Albany. And also I sang in the choir of men and boys there all through my high school years. That was another very formative experience, being here in Albany, New York. Just
the literature
experience. Yeah. So, I talked to Lloyd and I talked to my music teacher and a few other people, and they said, you should apply for music school. And my teacher at high school said, well, apply for Juilliard. And I was naive enough to not know that was a pretty audacious thing to do for somebody who hadn't been all that serious about studying music. But I put together a program. I applied as a voice major, and I looked at all the requirements. You had to have 5 pieces in various languages and all of that. And I did my audition, and I was accepted, and I was given a substantial scholarship, which once again, I couldn't believe. So I did my undergrad at Juilliard. Then after Juilliard, I was, wasn't quite sure what to do with myself. And I knew that Boston was a place where there were a lot of interesting things going on with music. And I had my oldest sister, Linda, and her husband had recently moved to Boston. So I thought, well, I'll move to Boston and see what that's like. And so I was in Boston for a long time and became the assistant conductor of the Handel and Haydn Society. I began to study conducting with my mentor, Thomas Dunn, who was the artistic director of the Handel and Haydn Society, and an amazing musician. And just, I was so lucky to be able to work with him. And I sang at Church of the Advent on Beacon Hill with the famous Edith Ho, and sang all of that incredible medieval and Renaissance literature every week in church. Just an amazing experience. And I sang with the Boston Opera Chorus. I did a lot of opera choruses to make some money on the side. And I was a substitute organist at many churches, and I did a lot of accompanying for singers, vocal accompaniment, and playing recitals, those kinds of things. Just really a rich life in Boston. And I had a relatively easy time, finding things to do. Of course, Boston is just amazing. It's really it's a college town. There are so many young people there. So there was no stigma around being so young and trying to do things. And there's all kinds of really interesting things going on there. So after I'd been in Boston for a while, I thought, well, maybe I should, look for a more advanced position. And the Handel and Haydn Society had given me opportunities to conduct them on several occasions. So, they gave me the professional choir and some instrumentalists and said, here, go do some concerts, pick music and do concerts.
That's fun.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And I was, I hadn't really seriously thought about conducting as a career. It kind of it came about because actually my first position with the Handel and Haydn Society was as rehearsal accompanist and continuo player, basso continuo player. So, and I remember one of the first concerts I was helping to prepare them for was Haydn the Creation. And it was we were having our very first choir rehearsal, a professional chamber choir of 32 singers. And I did the rehearsal the way my teacher, Mary Alice Cox at Juilliard, had taught me, which means I accompanied the rehearsal from open score at the piano. I didn't play from a piano reduction. I had my full score of the Creation, and I played all of the accompaniments from open score. And Thomas Dunn came up to me at the break in the rehearsal, and he said, "You're really good at that." He said, "Have you thought about conducting?" And I said, "Well, not really. I was just trying to be good at this." So he was the one who made it possible for me. He started to give me little concerts to conduct. So that's kind of how I worked my way into conducting, was from playing the piano and from playing basso continuo. I played harpsichord and organ for the performances of the Handel and Haydn Society in those days as well. And he allowed me to come to everything. I went to board meetings, I was just interested in it.
Right.
And I went to everything that he did and just kind of was a fly on the wall and watched how the organization worked.
I'm sorry. I was going to ask you, so did Professor Duns, who was also at Indiana when I was there, so I know him, and
yes,
he's such a warm, supportive soul. I know you're going to tell us where you moved to next. Was his position as faculty at Indiana, did that affect your next career move?
Well, not for a while.
Okay.
He stayed on in Boston, but I applied. There was a job that came open in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
with a group that was then called the Masterworks Chorus and Orchestra. It was a large community-based choral society with a professional chamber orchestra. And we did a series of 4 or 5 concerts a year in various locations around Washington, D.C. That job was advertised, and I applied, and I won the position. So it was really my first real conducting position beyond being a student and being, just somebody's assistant, where I was I was the artistic director. So I did the budgeting and the programming and, all of the nuts and bolts of trying to build an organization. So I was in Washington, D.C. for about 10 years. I loved it there. And it was a really exciting place to be for a relatively young person at that stage in my life. Washington's a real choral town. There are lots of choruses there, and there's an audience for choral music in Washington. And I had the opportunity to work with these great musicians, fantastic instrumentalists. The choir was very strong, and a rather youngish kind of group. Washington's quite transient. Right. And every year there's a new crop of interns and people just starting to make their career in various pursuits. And so the choir was really 20 and 30 somethings, largely, although there were some older people as well, but it was quite a young group. And I was a good match for them at that time. And we built that organization over the 10 years that I was there. And did a lot of fundraising and audience development and, all the things you have to do. And I had become good friends with the conductor of what was then called the National Chamber Orchestra in Washington, D.C., Peter Gajewski, really wonderful musician, wonderful conductor. And we had become good friends. We were about the same age, and we were both trying to do some of the same things. Mm-hmm. And we had talked through the years about the possibility of merging the two organizations so that we could maximize the staff that we had and all of those things. So we worked at that and kind of set up the structure. But it didn't actually happen during my tenure there, but things looked like they were moving in that direction. And then I got this idea that I should get a doctorate.
Why not?
I don't know what got into my head. And I applied at a number of schools, all very good. And I went, and by that time, Thomas Dunn had retired from Boston, and he had been appointed senior faculty member in the choral department at IU. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the places I thought about applying. And before I even sent in an application, I went out to IU and I spent a week going to classes and sitting in on rehearsals and also exploring Bloomington, Indiana. Being an East Coast boy, I really didn't think that I was going to like Bloomington, Indiana, that it was a place for me.
Right.
But anyway, I went out and visited. And at the end of the visit, I thought, well, all the programs I applied to were very good. But I was so impressed with the whole range of teaching and experiences I saw at IU, both choral music, the amazing range of choral music they do at that school, and then all of the opera, having a chance to play some role in opera production. I had gotten to know Marilyn Kaiser on the organ faculty, and the idea of being able to take lessons with Dr. Kaiser was just so exciting to me. She'd been one of my heroes from a great distance for a long time. So all of that kind of came together for me. And I thought, well, if I go to IU, I'll have to give up what was really a successful career in Washington, D.C.
Right.
But I'll learn something. Mm-hmm. I thought if I went to the other schools, I might not learn as much. I could get the same degree and have a good experience, but I wouldn't be challenged as much as I would be challenged at IU. So I threw caution to the wind and packed up my bags and moved to Bloomington.
The middle of nowhere.
And I remember the very first day I was in Bloomington. I arrived in Bloomington and my apartment was not ready. I had rented an apartment and I got there and the landlord says, you can't move in. We have repairs to do the apartment and you can't move in. So I had to very quickly find a storage facility in Martinsville, of all places, to store all of my stuff until I could move into my apartment. And as I was moving into my storage unit, there was a member of the science faculty. I can't remember which field, but he was moving out of the storage unit right next to me. And he said, "Well, where are you moving from?" And I said, "Oh, I just moved here from Washington, D.C." And he stopped what he's doing and he looked at me and he said, "Why?"
That's great.
As he was just on his way out. But that was my first day in Bloomington. So it took a while to adjust to it, but the school was everything that I had anticipated it would be. It was just an amazingly stimulating place and lots of really interesting people doing very interesting projects and research, and it was just amazing. And ultimately, it turned out to be a good choice. There's not much to do in Bloomington except study.
Right.
So, I just spent all of my time in the library or in the practice room, learning scores and studying and practicing skills and doing research and reading. And it was all very exciting. So my first year of coursework was basically that. I moved to Bloomington. I didn't really have anything else to do. I lived off my savings, and I had an assistantship that paid for my tuition and gave me a little stipend to live on. So that's basically, I spent my first year. Towards the end, in the spring, the second semester of my first year, I was walking by the choral office one day, and there were always job postings on the bulletin board outside the choral office. It was Lois Schaefer in those days, who was secretary of the choral office. And Lois always posted any job listing that came her way, thinking that the students needed money. And so there was a job description for the Bach chorale singers on the bulletin board. And I made a copy of it and I decided to apply. It sounded like a great group. And of course, all the faculty at IU were aware of the Bach chorale singers and knew of the group had a very fine reputation. So, people encouraged me to apply for it. I was getting ready at the end of that semester to go off on a European tour with Robert Shaw.
Oh, wow.
And so I applied for the Bach chorale singers. They gave me an appointment for an interview, which was literally the week before I was leaving for Europe. And I did the interview. It was at the old First United Methodist Church building in West Lafayette, right there downtown. And so many of our dearest friends were part of that committee. Dick Yeager, I met him there for the first time. And just so many people from the chorale. Karen Goff was there, and many other people. So, I enjoyed the interview, and it was there at the First Methodist Church. They had a choir. I brought some pieces to sing, and we had a little rehearsal and worked on the music together. And then I essentially left the country to go on this tour with Robert Shaw. And it was sometime thereafter, sometime that summer, they got back to me and let me know that I was chosen to be the next conductor. I didn't know Jerry Yonkman, who was music director before I was, but I certainly knew of his reputation as well. Yeah. He was very highly thought of. He had done his doctorate at IU and was very well known in the department, and he had, like I eventually did as well, he brought a number of people up from IU, students and faculty, to perform in concerts with the Bach chorale. And so I knew of Jerry Yonkman's reputation. All of that made it really appealing, and actually very exciting. So that summer, while I was in tour with the Robert Shaw Festival Singers, I sat down with Anne Howard Jones. Maybe that's a name you know. She was Mr. Shaw's assistant at the time, and she was the head of the choral program at Boston University for many years. And she helped me plan the repertoire for our first season.
Okay, I was going to ask you about what the chorale was like, what in terms of the repertoire they were singing and the size even, when you came aboard, and how it changed throughout.
The chorale was in phenomenal shape. Jerry Yonkman had cultivated the singers and built the choir to a very high level. And there was tremendous discipline. People were really serious about rehearsing and singing, very committed. I mean, he left the organization in great artistic shape.
Oh, that's nice.
We had, I think, about 60 singers, or maybe between 60 and 70, and fairly equally balanced between men and women, roughly 15 on a part. And of course, as I would quickly learn from starting to work with them, many of those singers were professional musicians themselves, teaching in the schools and conducting choirs, teaching piano lessons or violin lessons. And so the depth of musical ability and depth of musical knowledge in the group was really extraordinary. And very, I was a little bit surprised because Lafayette is kind of geographically a little bit isolated up there in the northwest of the state. And I didn't quite know what to expect in terms of, what the choir would be like. But almost immediately when we began to start to work together, it really opened my eyes. And I thought, well, wow, this is really an accomplished group. And they had such tremendous spirit and discipline. So that was all very exciting. I think for my first concert, we did the Bach Magnificat. Okay. And then because we were the Bach chorale singers, I did a sequence of orchestrally accompanied chorales from cantatas and the Vivaldi Gloria. And all of the soloists from the concert came from the choir. And we had fabulous soloists, Jane Alexander and Karen Goff and Sally Gecki. And I think David Kubiak might have sung, that might have been his first solo appearance with me anyway. So we were just off and running. And then we did our annual Festival of Lessons and Carols at St. John's Church that December. And then in the spring, we did Carmina Burana of Carl Orff, and with Janie Hornung. And I think my friend Thomas Jones from Boston came to sing the baritone, but Janie was the soprano soloist. And I paired that with Dominic Argento's I Hate and I Love, a wonderful choral cycle for a cappella choir with percussion. So that was our first season. And that also was my introduction to the youth chorus. The Tippecanoe Youth Chorus was conducted by Tom Saxon, who started it. And Tom was a fantastic musician, really brilliant. And of course, people from the choir assisted in the concerts, to the youth chorus concerts. I heard them perform a couple of times. And they had signed up to be the youth chorus for Carmina Burana. And before we started to rehearse Carmina Burana, Jim Ross said to me, Tom Saxon is moving to Birmingham, Alabama, and the youth chorus has no conductor. And we've asked everyone we can think of, and no one will take it on.
What an invitation.
Well, so I didn't know what to think. I'd heard them sing and I knew they were great, but so we had scheduled a rehearsal for Carmina Burana with me and the kids. I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks prior to Carmina Burana. And in that first rehearsal of Carmina Burana, they sang all of their parts for the Carmina Burana perfectly in the first 15 minutes of the rehearsal. And here I had 4 weeks of rehearsal planned. I was like, wow. So I said, well, let's just learn the rest of the piece.
Why not?
So I started teaching them other movements so that they could sing more in the piece. And they, of course, they could all read. Tom Saxon had both encouraged them and taught them to read, but also all of those kids took piano lessons and violin lessons, and they were the real music kids from the community. So so we did the Carmina Burana, and it was very satisfying performance, and the kids were spot on. They were just tremendous. And after that, Jim Ross said, well, if you don't take the directorship of the choir, I think we're going to have to disband the group.
Oh, geez.
And I thought I resisted for a long time. I said no many times. But then, my conscience bothered me. And I thought, wow, what a great organization Tom Saxon had built, and what an amazing amount of talent these kids had. So I agreed to take it on for a few seasons. I did say to them, I have no experience working with children. I have no background in music education. I don't know any of the tricks. And I can tell them when they're singing the correct note, or I can help them fix the rhythm, but I really don't know anything about how kids do these things. And they said, oh, it'll be all right. You did really well with the Carmina Burana, and all the kids liked it. So
half the battle right there.
so I went and sat in. Cecil Shoemaker also had a group called Lafayette Children's Choir, and I called up Cecil and I said, can I come and watch you rehearse the children's choir? I don't know how to do this. And you clearly have all the training and the experience. And of course, he had worked for many years with Henry Leck in Indianapolis.
Right.
So I went to a bunch of rehearsals and took notes about what did Cecil do? How did he keep the discipline in the room? And how did he keep everybody focused and interested? And how did he approach posture and singing and all that? So I filled up a notebook of notes from things I'd seen Cecil do and tried them in my way with the youth chorus. And then after a couple of seasons of that, we decided to merge the youth chorus and the chorale under one umbrella. Right. So that's pretty much the story of how I came to the Bach Chorale.
Yeah. So I have 2 questions that are related. So you must have conducted, upwards of 50 performances with the chorale.
Yeah.
Because you have the distinction of having the longest tenure of any of the artistic director, there have been 7. And so you were there 16 years and 50, maybe even more performances. What kept you around for so long? AKA, surely you had some wonderful performances that you wanted to keep coming back. What are there any specifics?
As skeptical as I was about, about moving to Indiana, I found after being there for a couple of years that I felt like I had kind of fallen into a really wonderful balance of things. I had my doctoral work at IU, which was challenging and very time consuming. And I had, after my first year of coursework at IU, the choral department offered me a faculty position. They created a job for me.
Okay.
They needed help in the department, and I had skills that were useful to them. So, of course, that kind of deepened I thought I would be at IU for 3 years, and then I'd move on to something else. I'd get the degree done in 3 years and then move on to other things. But they offered me this position, which was fantastic, and it gave me lots of experiences in a very safe environment. I was surrounded by colleagues who were looking after me for my best interests. And then I had the chorale, the Bach chorale. And also also within that time, I had applied for the organist choir master job at St. John's in Lafayette, where Jared Follett had been.
Right.
And had been invited to fill that position. So from that second year that I was in Indiana, I divided my time between Bloomington and Lafayette, and I had apartments in both cities. I will say, early on, I would often wake up in the middle of the night and think, where am I? See, I was in Washington, D.C. What happened? It was a really good balance. I would spend Monday through Thursday afternoon at IU. And then late Thursday afternoon, 4:30, 5 o'clock, I'd get in the car and drive to Lafayette in time to do choir rehearsal at St. John's. And I'd stay in Lafayette Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. Then we had Bach chorale rehearsal Sunday evening. And I would drive back to Bloomington after the Bach chorale rehearsal on Sunday night. So often I would be driving at midnight, 1 a.m. And I became on a first name basis with everybody who worked at the truck stop, right there on
37.
Because I would always stop there for my caffeine fix, because I'd be starting to fall asleep at that point. And I did that for 16 years, back and forth, put a lot of miles on the car. But it was a really stimulating balance of things to do. It's to simplify it, but not overly so. At IU, we'd all be kind of experimenting with rehearsal techniques and how do you work with a choir? How do you work with an orchestra? And, exploring repertoire and kind of in the environment of the academy. So at IU, we would do these projects. We wouldn't care if anybody came. That's the great freedom of the academy. We would do these very interesting projects and interesting repertoire, and we never had to worry about how many tickets we were going to sell, or we just did whatever we wanted to do because we were interested in it. And then on the weekends, I'd go up to Lafayette and have an opportunity to try to apply some of that in a very practical way, with a very, very good community chorus. I hesitate to even call the Master Singers of Lafayette a community chorus, because really, they really weren't a community chorus, except, of course, none of them were paid to be in the choir.
Right.
But they had so many music professionals and so many faculty members from Purdue with incredible backgrounds in various disciplines. I mean, it was just a remarkable organization from that point of view. And so I don't think it denigrates anybody to call them a community choir, but if the Bach chorale singers, the Lafayette Master Chorale, had been in any major city, they would easily have been competitive with the very best choirs in Boston or Washington, D.C. The Bach Chorale Singers was a stronger choir to a person than the group I conducted in Washington, D.C.
Mm.
So it was a good balance between academia and kind of practical things. One other thing about Lafayette too that was highly advantageous, or a couple of other things. I mentioned that, you know, Lafayette and West Lafayette are a little bit geographically isolated,
Right.
you know, and there's a community there. They have outstanding music programs in the schools, just as good as you'll find anywhere in the United States, really just absolutely remarkable. And then, you know, a major university right there. And so it's a very cultured atmosphere for such a small, geographically isolated town. So that was remarkable and made possible most of what we tried to do. And then the other thing was that, and I give Sheila Klinker and all of her colleagues great credit for a lot of this, but there was a lot of corporate business in the Lafayette area. Caterpillar, Alcoa, Great Lakes Chemical, Eli Lilly. And so it was possible to fundraise there in a way that's not always possible. We have some problems with that here in Albany. Okay. Albany is the state capital, and most of the, we do have corporations here and businesses here, but a lot of the money here is government centered. So it's a little bit more challenging to fundraise in this environment. But Lafayette had the confluence of those two aspects that makes it very unique and very rich. You know, it's an enviable place to be. And the Bach Chorale in those days, we had the advantage that if we didn't do a Handel oratorio or a major work, no one else in the area was going to do it. We didn't have any competition. Of course, there was the Lafayette Chamber Singers with
Clayton Lean.
Clayton Lean, yes. Once again, a remarkable group and a lot of crossover in membership between those two groups. But so we had this really outstanding chamber choir in the area, which again speaks volumes about the community and its support for the arts. And then had all the chamber music and the symphony. Ann Harrigan and I became great friends from that whole experience. And so Lafayette proved to be quite a remarkable place. So, you know, that's why I stayed for 16 years, this kind of balance between Indiana University and the experiences we could have in Lafayette was just very rewarding.
Yeah, sounds like
although sometimes challenging. Both jobs took a lot of work.
Well, it takes a special kind of person to do that, and organizations lucky to have had you. I am going to press you on a musical moment.
Sure.
I know, I'm sure are singers that sang with you that are still singing, or even now our audience. You know, what's something you remember from being on the podium as being just a highlight for you?
There were many memorable moments. So it's a little hard to choose one.
One or two or three.
But I think David Kubiak in his interview talked about the performances of Solomon of Handel that we did in collaboration with the Bloomington Early Music Festival. And I will tell you all honestly, we did 3 performances. We did a Lafayette performance at the Cathedral in Lafayette, absolutely gorgeous building and phenomenal acoustics. And then we did that was Friday night, I think. And then we did Saturday night at University of Indianapolis in the Crystal DeHaan Concert Hall, which in my opinion is the very best concert hall in the state of Indiana. So we did a second performance there, and then we did a third performance in our hall on Sunday at IU. It was a very ambitious schedule, and I don't know how many divorces were caused by that weekend at the chorale by the amount of time we all had to put in to pull that off. But I'll tell you very honestly, we had a small but very appreciative audience in Indianapolis. And then we had full houses for Lafayette and for Bloomington. But I would say, there may be around 100 people in the audience in Indianapolis, but there was something in the air that night. And we came out and began the concert. And it was partly the acoustic of that hall. The acoustic is just so great. But everybody was just on fire. The soloists, the choir, the orchestra. And I remember consciously thinking somewhere in the middle of the first act, I was playing the harpsichord and conducting while playing the harpsichord. And I thought to myself while I was doing this, this is exactly what I always wanted to do with my life. And I was feeling so immensely fulfilled by what we were doing together that night. I mean, and it really, that really stood out for me. And to this day, when I think about, we all have in our careers, we play many concerts, and of course we try to make every single concert we give memorable. But if I had to pick 2 or 3 of the peak moments, that would probably be the number one, where, and I just felt it while we were doing it. And so did the audience that attended. We had a tremendous reception from the audience. We got a great review in the paper. The Indianapolis Critic said he chose us as the best concert of the year in Indianapolis that year, which meant so much. I was so proud of the chorale and of the board and of all the work it took to put that together. So for me, that was a really high point. There were several others. The whole Kodály series of concerts with Marilyn Kaiser. We performed and recorded all of Kodály's major works for choir and organ. And we did the performances in Lafayette, once again at the First United Methodist Church in West Lafayette, with Marilyn Kaiser at the keyboard. And then we all took a retreat up to Valparaiso University they have this fantastic Chapel of the Resurrection. Chapel is not the right word. That building is a cathedral,
right?
Enormous, but it has fantastic acoustics, and it has this wonderful Dobson pipe organ. I think it might have been something before it was a Dobson, maybe a
Schlicker.
Yes, and then Dobson had recently rebuilt it, and the organ was just had so many beautiful stops and sounds. So we went up for a weekend, 3 days of recording sessions for Pro Organo Records. That was a real high point. Music that I dearly love, that the chorale just, it's another testament to the master singers, to the Bach chorale. That repertoire is a little bit off the beaten track. Not everybody performs that repertoire, and they just threw themselves into it without any hesitation. So it's just what an enormous privilege to be able to program music like that and to have a choir of colleagues who were as excited about it as I was and willing to work hard to try to make it good. So that concert really stood out. I mean, there are so many, Michael. I would, well, here's a different kind of event that I was so pleased about. We did a series of performances, I think 2 performances of semi-stage performances of Leonard Bernstein's operetta Candide with Anne Harrigan and the Lafayette Symphony. And it's a piece I absolutely adore. I mean, Bernstein is was such an inspiration to me, and that score in particular. And Anne, someone who I had enormous respect for. What a terrific musician, and what a great colleague. I was just so lucky that I found a kindred spirit over there at the symphony. She was so kind, and also she'd get excited about my ideas. I think I was the one who proposed it, but Anne just immediately said, yes, we have to do this. And so we kind of worked together to put it to, and it was a real collaboration between the symphony and the chorale. We shared all of the expenses, we shared the income, we shared all the work that it took to make the event come together. And now I wasn't conducting, and I think I did sing in the choir for the performances, but at the first rehearsal, I was just standing out in the Long Center, in the theater, kind of watching everything and listening to it. And I got really choked up as the dress rehearsal was going on. And I thought, this is why we do this, this event wouldn't have happened if we hadn't thought of it, and if Anne hadn't been excited about it, and if everybody on the boards of both groups hadn't thrown themselves in, we made it happen. Right. It was this wonderful thing, wonderful music, a great piece, and this great collaboration between the two organizations. And it happened simply because we thought of it and decided to try to make it happen. And I really got choked up at that dress rehearsal. I mean, that's the power of the arts, and it reminds me that, that's exactly how the New York Philharmonic got started and how the Chicago Lyric Opera got started. Somebody had an idea and said, let's try this. And they weren't scared or frightened. And people came together to help them do it, right? It takes a lot of people to make these things work. So the community came together, and I was just so proud of that. I was proud of everything we did with the symphony, but I was particularly proud of that because it was such a powerful demonstration of what the arts can be, and how where there once was nothing, something can bloom and flower and be there for the community. And who would ever thought that Lafayette, Indiana deserved to have such a good performance of Candide of Leonard Bernstein? But it was really good performances. And our cast was a mix of chorale members and guests that we invited. We had a big cast. So Carl Brandt was in the solo cast, and David Kubiak, and we had a lot of people from the community and from the chorale in the cast, and then we had several guest artists who were also wonderful. So in every way, that event was just an inspiration and reminded me. It took me right back to that dress rehearsal of the Brahms Requiem I was in the 9th grade. I felt like I had come full circle, and that, and being so excited about that, I felt like it was it had really proved to me that this is what the arts are and what they can mean to us.
Well, and you mentioned how that just came because of an idea, and it was, it was followed and shared by somebody else. That's sort of the history of the chorale. It was some singing, and it just kind of grew, and here we are 56 years later, and 16 years of which you spent.
Yeah.
And I think that during your time here, you were greatly respected, and many people feel you raised the artistic standard, and I would say you definitely left your mark. I want to thank you for spending time with me today, reminding me of these great memories. and to reminisce and share our love for the organization and for the wonderful things it does for our community. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Michael, and congratulations, and I wish you all the best. I know the Master Singers have a bright future ahead, and Lafayette really should be very grateful to have such a high level of choral performance, both from the schools and from the chamber singers and from the Master Singers. It's a remarkable place. So it was a privilege to be a part of it when I had the opportunity.
Well, thank you again so much for all that you've done and for those kind words. And as always, thanks to all of you who are watching for your support of the Lafayette Master Chorale and Children's Choir. I hope you've enjoyed these peeks behind the scenes of the organization we all value and the music it brings into so many lives. Thank you.